This is Joseph Carpenter. Today is the 22nd of August, 2025, and I am interviewing Mr. Don Gilbert. This interview is taking place in Austin, Texas. It is sponsored by the UTA Department of History and Geography and is part of the Terrell State Hospital collection. Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed.
Happy to be here.
Tell me, where were you born? Tell me a little bit about your growing up.
So I was born in San Antonio. My father was in the military, and I was born at Lackland Air Force Base. I think we moved to Austin when I was in the first grade and did most of my growing up in Austin. I graduated from Reagan High School, which back in those days was the powerhouse football program of the state. Good experience in high school. Went on, I played golf in college, in high school and college, went to college on a scholarship to Sam Houston. If there's a better way to go through college than a golf scholarship, I don't know what it would be. It was a great time at Sam Houston. So those are my growing up years, and they continued on until I was about 50.
Really? So what did your, I could understand that. Yeah. What did your dad do for a living?
Well, he was, when he left the military, he went to work at the Austin State Hospital as the personnel. I think he was in the personnel department for a little while, and then he became the first claims agent, which meant you went around and to courthouses, and as debts were incurred by patients in the hospital who passed away, they had a whole cadre of people who went around to see if they could get a claim on the whatever estate there may be. And so he was a claims person for a number of years after he left the military.
How did he end up in that position coming out of the military?
Well, I'm guessing a lot like me. I had an uncle who was his brother-in-law, who was the chief of personnel and training for the Texas Department of Mental Health and Mental Retardation. So he had a connection.
Wow. And
so I think it was a job that he got referred to probably by my uncle, Bill Reno. And I don't remember how many years he worked in that kind of line, but probably 10 or 12 years, I guess, until he finally retired.
Did your mom work outside the home?
No, she did not.
And do you have any siblings?
No.
Okay. So just briefly talk about how your experience at Sam Houston State shaped you, developed you, and gave you direction. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I went to school to play golf. I didn't play golf when I went to school. It was what I thought I was going to do the rest of my life. I thought I was going to, be Tiger Woods, I guess. I don't know.
Right.
And realized I didn't have the talent to play for a living. I came close to trying that, but I didn't do it. So, but I played a lot of golf in college with members of the local country club. Some of them were professors, some of them were successful business people. And I guess the first thing I would point to is the relationships that I developed as a college kid playing golf with these very successful people and very smart people, and the guidance that they were so willing to provide. Sometimes I asked and sometimes they just provided. And I think having the experience of working, becoming friends at some level with people much older than me and successful was something that I valued at the time and still value today. The academic work at Sam Houston was unremarkable. I was an okay student, just barely good enough to have enough grade points to get into graduate school later. But it was a great experience, and a number of the professors that I had there were also good mentors to me, and I tended to have pretty good relationships with most of the professors at the university and the administration at the university. So I think that's probably what I got out of Sam Houston, is really sort of a growing up period and becoming more comfortable with conversations and relationships with people who were well past me in terms of age and success.
I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when did your career at Terrell State Hospital begin?
in May of 1974, which is the year that I finished college with my bachelor's degree in business administration. And as I said a minute ago, my uncle, I wasn't looking to go to work at the Carroll State Hospital. I had an uncle who thought with the business degree that I came out of school with, it'd be good if I had some experience in the personnel department. And of course, he was a personnel director for the agency. And so he called one of the personnel directors who happened to be in Terrell and happened to have a vacancy, and referred me on to Ron Johnson, who was the personnel director and my first boss, for the interview. And it went well, and I got the job and started actually before my graduation ceremony. I was already working. In fact, I missed my graduation ceremony because I was working at the Terrell State Hospital.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what were your duties?
So I was what they called a Personnel Administrator 1, which is the very entry level. I made $719 a month. I still recall that. My job was to, and when I started out, was to interview applicants for jobs that we had at the hospital for which they might qualify. And so I was kind of the initial screener for people who wanted to come to work at the state hospital. Which again was a great experience because I got to talk to a great many people in different walks of life, some of them doctors, some of them attendant level staff, and trying to figure out if it was going to be a good fit or likely to be a good fit for them at the state hospital, and would refer them on to department heads or the decision makers who finally would either hire them and decided they weren't to be hired.
What were the challenges in that job?
Well, I think because I was 21 years old, just not even close to 22 yet when I started that job in Terrell. When I started school, I was young and I finished young. So being really just a kid, I didn't feel like I was a kid, but I'm sure I was. And I probably didn't look 16, much less 21. And so I think the confidence you have to be able to be effective in communicating with people who are senior to you and making decisions that were in some way impacted by the people that you would refer to them. I think I had to get past that. And fortunately for me, and really for everybody who worked at the state hospital, they're just such caring people that go to work there. I mean, really and truly, people don't go to work at the state hospital for the money that they're paid. They go for the reward that they get out of making a difference in somebody's life. And I think while there are exceptions to that, of course, such a great percentage of the people that worked at the Terrell State Hospital were eager to help, to be a mentor to me, to allow me to screw up and fail, and it was okay, and I would learn from that. I was lucky, like anyone else young working there, that to have so many people that were such great mentors, people who could guide you in the right direction. And so it wasn't, when I think about what was hard about starting out, there wasn't much hard about it. I mean, the truth is it was learning, and I was curious, and I think people recognized that and wanted to learn. And so my starting out period there was smooth and easy.
So what was the next step for you there?
So I became, after not very long, a personnel assistant too. So, I was going in the right
rapid
direction.
rise, right?
And then I'd had one more job in the personnel office. My boss was still there. It wasn't his job that I ultimately got. But then went from the personnel office to a new job that was created. And it was to be the director of what they called auxiliary services, which is food service and housekeeping and grounds crew and a whole bunch of other stuff. And at that time, then my boss was Noel Woodley, who was a senior. He was the assistant superintendent, and he was a senior person, had a lot of experience in hospital administration, and really one of the finest people I've ever known. And I think the greatest gift that he could have given me was to put me in that role with very little authority. I couldn't tell people what to do. Maybe I could, but it wasn't clear that I could. The lines of accountability weren't clearly through me, although I was in charge of those services. Mm-hmm. And so what that did for me is if I was going to get something done in that job, I had to persuade people that it was a good thing to do or try the thing I was hoping that they would try. And, that was, you learn so much from that kind of interaction with people, where if I had been given line authority to tell them what to do, so to speak, probably wouldn't have worked in the first place, but it would have been a disservice to me. So I think Noel Woodley knew that and knew I had growing up to do, and that would be a good way to set me on that path. And as I look back and all the great experiences I've had in the different jobs, I think that was one of the greatest gifts that I ever got.
How long was it, excuse me for interrupting you, but how long was it between your move from personnel, or from your move to personnel to this other position?
Really not very long. And what I found is that you had, in the state hospital, you have two tracks. You've got the clinical track and where all the important stuff happens, and then you have the administrative track. And there weren't a lot of young, ambitious people working there at the time. And so I just sort of plodded my way through the organization. And so to answer your question, I think it was maybe a year or a year and a half, pretty quickly, actually. Mm-hmm. And so I had that job for a couple of years, and then learned a great deal. Not only learned a lot, but had a number of really strong relationships that I developed. And as I worked with that level of the organization, there were even more people that were helpful to me personally and professionally. And what about this time in my career with Terrell, what I came to realize is that there was such a sense of family about the organization, and if not family, at least community. We were together for a common purpose, and I should talk a minute about the leadership of the hospital that cultivated this kind of culture. So I mentioned Noel Woodley, who was the sort of the number two person. The superintendent at the time was Dr. Lewis Cowley, and he was a very well-respected psychiatrist in Cuba. I think he had a role similar to Surgeon General for Cuba, and he fled the Castro regime, went to Florida, and then ended up in Terrell. And he had a very sort of paternalistic, kind way about him. And I think he encouraged or facilitated maybe the coming together of people who worked there for the common good, and we're all in this together kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so I think that culture was very beneficial to me. So that was my first stint at Terrell. I had 4 years or so, a couple of years as the director of auxiliary services. Mm-hmm. And then I went on to, I had 2 years in Austin as, you'll like this title, I was an assistant deputy commissioner. So I was the assistant to the assistant to the whatever.
Right.
But it was a great job because it really one of the most informative jobs that I had, because my good friend turned out to be one of my best friends in life. Kenny Dudley was one assistant deputy commissioner. Kenny went on to be the superintendent at Austin State Hospital and had a great career. And so he had half of the state hospitals, and I had the other half that we, under the supervision of the deputy commissioner for mental health services, who was over all of the state hospitals and other things. He delegated to us the job of staying up with what was going on at the hospitals we were assigned. And so that allowed me to go to 5, as I remember, different state hospitals to meet with the superintendent, to talk about things that were working and not working, and things they needed and didn't need, and that sort of thing. So it's a great education. I had that job for a couple of years, I think, before then going back to Terrell as the assistant superintendent as Noel Woodley's replacement.
So you left the state, went back to Terrell State Hospital, as the assistant superintendent at that time. And how long had you been at the state? 2
Yeah,
years?
so I had been there 4 years.
4 years.
And I didn't leave state employment or the agency. I just went to the central office of the agency for 2 years. And
okay.
then the position opened up in Terrell for the assistant superintendent. Dr. Cowley was still the superintendent. I had a great relationship with him and maintained a lot of friendships and contacts with the people in Terrell. So it was a great fit for me to go back. And at that time in my career, I think it was then that I lived on the grounds of the hospitals back when certain positions qualified for free housing. And so I spent the next many years living on the grounds of the state hospital, and having that perspective was an interesting thing too, because it allowed me, one of the things it allowed me to do was easily go around on the night shift. And people often never saw anybody from administration. But I was up, and if I was awake, I was curious, you know, and I didn't do it all the time, but I did it a lot, where I would go out, tell them I'm coming. I didn't want to surprise anybody, but, you know, just to visit with people on the night shift. And back in those days, you know, there weren't many people working at night, and it was an interesting job they had, and a difficult job at times.
So how long did you do that job?
Well, let's see. I was the assistant superintendent for about, I think, 3 years, maybe 2 or 3 years. And at some point during that time, the superintendent left, and I was named as the acting superintendent. And I was the acting superintendent at Terrell for, I think it was over 2 years. Now, that's a long time to be acting in a job.
Right.
Not being a physician, and historically, all of those jobs required a physician's degree. You had to be a physician to be a superintendent. Ultimately, the legislature changed the law, and at some point, I think it was 2.5 years that I was acting superintendent, and then I became the superintendent of the hospital. And that was, I think, in '83.
How were you received as the superintendent, being a non-physician? How were you received?
It's a good question, and my sense was that it was well received in the hospital because I was well known. I'd been there since I was 21 years old, and I was, I think, 29 by then. So they knew me, and they knew the way I work, and, you know, I was part of the culture there, you know, along with a lot of people that were in administration. So not so well received across the system, where other superintendents were physicians, and they weren't sure that anybody but a physician could do a job like that. And, you know, I had anybody who's not a physician in a clinical setting has a different perspective than the physician administrator. So there was no question that I wasn't going to challenge anybody's clinical decision-making. And I think there's an important piece that I learned along the way, too, in this regard, and that is your organizing principle for how you set your organization, put it together, is of critical importance. And I believed the only really important thing that we did at Terrell State Hospital was make people better, care for them well, and make them better. So I wanted to organize the administrative function around what's the least amount of effort we can assemble to put the resources where they can do the most good, which was in direct care. And I think that was, it made it easier for physicians to accept in Terrell at the hospital, accept that I was not going to do harm to the organization and wasn't going to do something strange. I probably did a few things that were strange, but not intentionally. But they were patient with me. And I guess that's the other thing. I was still pretty young at that time. Like very young. As I think back on it, to have the number of patients that we had and the number of staff, and to be that remote from supervision by the Austin Central office, that we didn't see those people very much. The fact that I didn't screw something up in a major way is pretty much a miracle. But I had a great staff around me, some great people that absolutely kept things in line and felt very comfortable in saying to me if I had an idea that didn't fit or they didn't think was going to work, to say, here's what I think's can not work about that.
Right.
And I'd listen to that. And I was often guided by that. Sometimes we did it anyway, and sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. But I think the point of that is that I had an executive team around me that was very, very much a part of things. They weren't waiting for me to tell them if the light was green or red. Right. We did things in a very collaborative way for the most part. Now, they might tell you it was different than that. They might not have gotten their point across as well as they wanted to. But for the most part, I think we hung together very tightly. Mm-hmm. And so the decision-making, the course of the hospital's operation was guided by, I was at the top of the hill, but I had some really great people guiding the process too.
So the hospital had a patient census, an average patient census of over 1,000 people at this time?
Yeah, when I took over, I think we had almost 1,000 patients.
And staff was about 1,000?
The staff was a little less than that.
Yeah.
A point that I should have made earlier, and I'll make now, is that in 1974, when I started at the Terrell State Hospital, we had just under 2,000 patients, and we had 850 staff.
Wow.
Now, we fast forward to when I'm the superintendent, and we had nearly 900 staff, I think, and about 1,000 patients.
It's a little more equal.
So, yeah, and today, the Terrell State Hospital has maybe 200 patients and 850 staff.
Wow.
So that's the progression from 1974 till today.
That's amazing.
And yeah, it's amazing in the sense that they're not overstaffed now. Mm-hmm. And so what were we when we had 2,000 patients?
Right, exactly.
And it's back to this, and we'll talk at some point along the way, we need to talk about the class action lawsuit and how it shaped the Terrell State Hospital and every other hospital. But it was absolutely, back in the early days, a kind of paternalistic system where patients came in, doctors did what doctors do, saying this is what we're going to prescribe, this medicine, and you're going to do this program and this program. And it was a very much, you're the patient, we're the staff, we're in charge, we do what, And that's also changed in many, many ways for the better, where the patient and often the family of the patient are participating in the treatment discussion and the plan and all of those things. Back then, with 850 staff and 2,000 patients, you just had to, everybody was sort of treated the same.
Right.
And that wasn't good. And that was a major point of contention in the class action lawsuit that developed.
Mm-hmm. What was the condition of the facility at the time you were there?
Yeah, so crowded with 2,000 patients,
right.
Very crowded, almost no privacy. So you had ward areas that had half walls where the beds were in a day room. So you could see across the entire sleeping area of the ward with no privacy, partitions or anything. The day room was sparsely furnished. It was very austere, very, very sterile, and hard surfaces. And you see pictures or movies or whatever of old institutions, and that's what it looked like. The grounds of the hospital were beautiful. They were well kept and orderly and neat. Back then, patients at the hospital had jobs, many of them did, in the hospital, delivering the mail, working in the greenhouse, a lot of things that were looking back, I think people would say were very therapeutic.
Mm-hmm.
There was very little pay that went with that, but it was also voluntary. The person didn't have to do the job. Most of them wanted to because it gave them something to do during the day that was a distraction from living in that ward setting.
Mm-hmm.
But the Department of Justice came in at some point and said, you're not paying these people minimum wage. And of course, there was no budget to do that. And so it ended up discontinuing that part of patient life that was, I think, for many people, to their detriment. And it was a shame.
How many of I've heard in my other conversations, farming and the dairy and those things. How many of those things were still going on?
Yeah,
when
we
you were
were
there?
pretty much out of the farming business and the dairy, but not by many years when I first started there. Most of the jobs are around the campus, working, as I said, in the greenhouse. There were a lot of maybe the reason the campus looked so good is that we had a lot of people working in the gardens and the mowing the grass and keeping the place clean. But we had other, some of them were administrative jobs. We had a guy that delivered our mail that was had been in the hospital a long time. Mm-hmm. The other thing about those years is that people would come into the hospital and some would stay less than 90 days, but a lot didn't, and a whole lot of our population had been in the hospital for years and years. Mm. We had one section of the hospital with, as I remember, 60 or 90 patients in a ward building that had continuous lengths of stay over 7 years.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, they back then called them the back wards. They were refractory to treatment, that medicines didn't work, and it was a particularly challenging place to work at the hospital.
I can imagine. So what reforms were you responsible for implementing at the hospital?
A lot of things happened while I was there. I wouldn't say that I was responsible for them. In most cases, I wasn't. But for example, we had a period of renovation of the interior of our campuses that provided privacy. And I mentioned earlier there was none at one time, and it was not absolute privacy, but it was at least in these segments of the ward where you had sleeping areas and maybe 6 people to a sleeping area. You had partitions that separated that area from the next area over. In other words, you couldn't look across the ward and see all the sleeping beds. And there was a good deal of development of privacy. There was revamping of the interior of the ward buildings that was important. One of the things that I think was an accomplishment and something that I think was very important to do was client rights were not even a consideration when in the early 70s when I started, but client rights was a big issue. And so we established a client rights officer. I think we were the first one to actually have somebody who went around, pursued complaints that patients had, talked with patients, dealt with grievances and that kind of thing. So client rights was a developing issue and long overdue, but we started that. We also started something called a family center that I think was it was symbolic, and it was important in a practical way. We serve 21 counties in the Northeast Texas area, and many of those families couldn't afford to come to the hospital very often, particularly the distance that it was and from the hospital. And so we opened something that was like a Ronald McDonald House, if you remember those, where they had really nice living accommodations for visitors of patients in the hospital. And so we started the first family center, is what we called it. And it was an old nursing dormitory kind of thing that we renovated, all with volunteer money, most all of it Some of it came from Hog Foundation. Since we're here, I should say that. But most all of the volunteer money came from the local community and people that we could sell on the idea that this would be an important thing to have in the hospital. And so we developed the Family Center, which allowed families to come in. Some of them, we had an adolescent and a children's unit, some of them to see their small children and participate with the treatment team in what they were trying to do and trying to accomplish, participate in the discharge planning to prepare them. Now, it wasn't fully utilized all the time, but it got a lot of traffic went through there, and a lot of families were able to come in, make the drive, stay a night or 2 nights, and we made a point of furnishing that in a way that was comfortable, not institutional, but comfortable and attractive. And our client rights officer officed there in the Family Center, so it was strategically a good place for her to be. And there was a lot of other stuff that changed during the time I was superintendent. A lot of it related to the class action, federal class action lawsuit.
You had mentioned that. Go ahead and
talk
a little bit.
Let me talk some about that, because it's hard to think about my time in Terrell without talking about the conditions that were created by the lawsuit. So it happened that the class action lawsuit that was ultimately called RAJ versus whoever the commissioner was at the time started as Jenkins versus Cowley. I mentioned Lewis Cowley as the super. So it was a Terrell State Hospital patient who filed a suit against the hospital because of inadequate care, safety issues, lack of individualized treatment, a number of things. That later grew into a class action suit against all Texas hospitals, and it lasted for 20 plus years.
Oh my gosh.
So the issues of the lawsuit were around patient safety, individualized treatment, privacy rights, those kinds of things. And so when the lawsuit was filed, it was like it spread like wildfire through the media. And so in the Dallas area, the Dallas Morning News had almost a daily report on some atrocity that was discovered by the plaintiff's attorneys at the state hospital.
Right.
And it was really one of the darkest periods that I was part of at the Terrell State Hospital, because, you have, as I mentioned, some really caring people who want to make a difference, who are working hard, trying to do the right thing with the resources that we had. And, it became a taboo subject to talk about Terrell State Hospital. Recruiting became incredibly difficult. And
these were, excuse me for interrupting, but these were issues that you were already trying to address prior to the lawsuit.
Right, and ones that we had a fraction of the resource that was needed ultimately and provided ultimately to address those issues. So we were doing what we could, and what we could do was woefully inadequate. And so you had this period where there was just a media blitz about the state hospital. It was this terrible place, and so it was a tough period of time. So that lawsuit developed, and a master, and I think they call him the court coordinator, but there was a person who was in charge of bringing a lawyer around to every state hospital, looking around and making notes about how awful it was, essentially. And so that was terribly disruptive and defeating for the staff that worked there, who were working hard, trying to do the right thing. And they'd come in, tell them what a horrible place they were running. And it was tough. That developed further into a panel of experts that the court assembled, the monitor coordinated. And for years and years, the panel would come to your hospital maybe every 8 or 9 months or so, review records in private, and come back and conclude that you hadn't really done much at all since the last time they were there. Nothing was better. The legislature, of course, was very concerned about the federal court's intervention and presence in our state hospitals. and responded with funding that tried to address the issues that were of concern to the court and the plaintiff's attorneys. And staffing improved. We got more money to put into staffing. Maybe not the right staffing, because it was mostly an issue of having enough, we called attendants, but paraprofessional people to man the wards, and we had ratios that developed and we had to meet, and it was a mess. But they would come and look at your records and look at your staffing and look at all the things you'd done and conclude almost invariably that things were either only a little bit better or worse than they were last time. And so we had a very difficult time for many years, actually, with that panel that would come in. They would be experts from all over the country, psychiatrists and social workers, and we never knew what good enough looked like. We knew we were better. They didn't always see it that way, but they would read records. We didn't know necessarily what they found in any record, but they would conclude at the end of the deal and end of their survey, which usually lasted 3 or 4 days, that things were still very bad. Well, that caused then the staff to not only be frustrated by that, but then start to question whether these guys really know what they're talking about. And so without knowing what good enough looked like, it was just a horrible experience where we'd try to get ready for the next visit, and the staff would be so irritated about the process that it was hard to get them not to get confrontational with the surveyors.
Right.
And so,
Understandably so.
Yeah, for sure. And so anyway, it developed that way. A lot of good things happened during this period in terms of resource development and additional opportunities for change. But it wasn't until later that we proposed a settlement agreement to the lawsuit that forced the definition of what is adequate, forced what's compliance going to look like.
Right.
How well should we be scoring on whatever objective measure of compliance we can develop, and what's it going to take to get out of the lawsuit? So this is after my time at Terrell, but I was responsible for heading that process up, which was a very interesting process for me. And so I was, after Terrell, I was still employed by Terrell, but I was brought back to Austin to work with. I was the acting deputy commissioner for mental health for a year, and during that time, that's when I worked with a team that developed this quality approach to defining what's necessary to meet compliance with the lawsuit and to achieve compliance.
Let me ask a clarifying question. Terrell was not the only hospital, the only state hospital that was having this experience with this group of court-appointed.
Right. As soon as it became a class action suit, it was then a lawsuit on behalf of every state hospital patient in Texas. So the same thing happened in the other hospitals as we experienced in Terrell. They go around, do the same review. Things are not getting better. Things are only a little bit better. Things are not nearly good enough, was always the response. And so if this is the right time, I can tell you about how that story ends, because it's pretty interesting. So again, this is after my time in Terrell, but I came to understand through this process in Terrell that unless we have an objective measure for what we're looking for in individualized treatment and patient safety and whatever else the other issues were, client rights, we would do this forever, because by then, by this time in the process, with these monitors coming in and going out, it was there was so much acrimony and so much history that the monitors, when they came in, couldn't possibly see Terrell State Hospital in a different light than they had for the years before. It's just they came in looking for more bad stuff.
Right. It was almost what they expected is what they saw.
They were conditioned to expect it not to be good. And so in the process of developing this solution to the lawsuit, I got to know the plaintiff's attorney, who was Ed Cloutman, and a great lawyer and a great guy, a hard-nosed lawyer, but he was also reasonable. And I got to know all of the panel that that were doing all these reviews. And so one night we were at dinner. I was actually at this time doing double duty. I was still working in central office, but I was coming back and forth from Terrell. But I said, it seems to me that rather than you picking a magical day and time where you pull the records that happen to look right in your perspective, we'd be a lot better off if we had an internal process, a self-managing process to look at our own work objectively and on a regular basis score the records that we review and the whatever we're trying to survey in an objective fashion that you would find reasonable and objective and reliable. And so they sort of bought that and sort of didn't. And so what we were doing in the background while I was having this conversation is we were developing our own measures of what should individualized treatment plans look like. What are the basics of what they should contain? And in looking at our records, we'd sample our records and see how many are compliant. And so we went through a process finally, to make this long story shorter, a process with the court monitor and the consultants where we got them to define what elements had to be in place for there to be adequate individualized treatment. And we developed a scoring grid for that and for all the other issues in the lawsuit. And so the next step then was to say, okay, how much is good enough? And, we knew what our scores were because we modeled them before we had the discussion. Mm-hmm. And so what we did was I agreed to, based on their evaluation, to go to the 4 best state hospitals in the country, whatever they thought they were. Let's take our instruments, our measurement instruments, let's go see their records. And we ended up going to, it might have been 5, but 4 states. And it seemed like it was Colorado and Virginia and North Carolina, somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So we had this team, which is a team composed of their consultants and our best clinicians, go in there and pull records and use our little scoring grid and see what's, to get the scores for those best in class kind of thing.
Right.
Well, some of them were very good. Most of them were not as good as we already knew that we were. Okay. Some of them were better. But anyway, that was the process of negotiating. How much progress do we have to make? What's the goal look like if we have 90% compliance? Is it 85? What can we agree is a reasonable deal? And of course, they said these are the best hospitals in the country. Mm-hmm. And so we shouldn't have to be the best in the country to meet constitutional requirements of safety and all those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. So we kind of put them in a corner on this and said, okay, let's nail this down and say what is good enough. And so we negotiated around that, came up with scores that we had to achieve and maintain in each hospital for some period of time. We actually had an oversight system in each hospital and one that took people from each hospital and made a team out of them to go look at their sister hospital scores and validate their performance. Anyway, it was a complicated process, but it worked, and we ended up, as soon as we knew what the requirements were and the compliance level was, we started exiting from the lawsuit hospital by hospital.
Right.
And as it turned out, as I mentioned, it started at Terrell State Hospital. It was a class action lawsuit. And as it turned out, when it's finally settled, it was RAJ versus Gilbert when I was the commissioner. So that was my...
How interesting.
Yeah, my full circle
Full
moment.
circle,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Right. How interesting. What was the community's response? Because Terrell State Hospital is very important to Terrell, the community.
Largest employer. The community, I think, valued the hospital, valued the people who worked there, and they were, in most cases, unclear about what happened at the hospital. We tried to open that up. We had a very active volunteer program. We grew that a good bit in the years that I was there, thanks to some really great volunteer service coordinator people that we had in those jobs. But it became a much less suspicious place to most people in the community. And, we encouraged all of the administrative staff and clinical staff to get out there, join the service clubs, be part of the community. And as you said, it was a very important part of the community. They supported us in many, many ways. And so I think one of the great values of having a state hospital in a relatively small community is you really do get the community support around that hospital.
Right.
They want it to do well. They want to be helpful in ways that they can, and we certainly had that in Terrell.
So how do you think your time at Terrell prepared you for the next steps?
Later
Not only were you involved in the ground floor of this very important case, but you were involved in settling that case. So how did that prepare you for the future?
Well, in every way I could think of, really. I mean, from helping me develop skills as an administrator and as a manager and as a leader, all that stuff started at Terrell. And, as I said a couple of times before, I had so many mentors and people that were eager to help and to help me grow. And so I think I left Terrell with the confidence that I could gather the support of people around a common cause. And so the jobs I had after that were really important jobs and interesting jobs. I was, after leaving Terrell, I went on to run the Dallas County Mental Health and Mental Retardation Center, which is a big organization. And I could never have done that had I not had the background of understanding what happened in Terrell. If you think about it, the hospital is one end of the continuum and the community is the other in terms of care. And so having 3 or 4 years in Dallas to understand the process both of taking the person from the community into the hospital and receiving the person from the hospital back in the community and how you make that fit was an important piece that I learned in Dallas, but would never have been able to learn it had it not been for my background in Terrell.
Right.
And so from there, I went on to be the commissioner of the agency for a number of years. And again, having that experience base, both from Dallas and more specifically from Terrell, about the work, the mission of the agency, what's important, what's not important. I think I mentioned earlier the notion that the organizing principle ought to be around the delivery of your mission, the purpose of your organization. And when I was at the mental health agency, it was painful, but we were able to move the administration of that agency to just barely half of what it was when I got there. And in the process, we had a waiting list for services all over the place, and we were able to move a whole lot of people into services in the community, particularly with the money that we saved from, I don't want to say excessive administration, but more than we had to have. And so that was again born out of an understanding that I got somewhere along the line in Terrell.
Right. So eventually you moved into the Texas Health and Human Services as the commissioner. Talk a little bit about that, because that's a pretty big jump.
It's a big agency. So at the time that I left the agency that was then Mental Health and Mental Retardation, it doesn't exist anymore, but it's what I was doing. The Health and Human Service Commission had 13 agencies, including the one that I was running, that were really spanned all of health and human services. It was a health department, it was protective services, it was any rehab, everything.
Wow. And
that was about 25% of the state budget. So it was at 55,000 employees. And so the governor, who had approved my appointment to the mental health agency, was very kind to me, and I think he liked me and Governor Bush. And the person that had the Health and Human Service job was leaving, and he said, I think you ought to do that. And I was kind of ready to be done with state government And the other thing is I felt like the role of the Health and Human Service Commission was really perfunctory in some ways. It was a coordinating agency, and if you're running an agency, you're not interested in coordinating unless everybody was going to do what you're doing already.
Right.
That's good coordination. But if I got to do something else, different story.
Right.
So, and I said to the governor, I said, I'm not sure that that agency is one that's adding value to state government. It's, going back to the organizing principle, it's not making anybody better. It's not a direct contact with anybody. It's questionable about whether there's enough authority in the agency, the commission, to affect the agencies. So we have a process, as you may know, in Texas, that's a sunset process. Every 10 years or 12 years, whatever it is, they go in and they look at the agency for what it is and what it's doing, what it's costing, what the difference it's making. And so the agency was up for sunset, and I told the governor, I said, I'll do it. I would have done it regardless if he said, I need you to. It just felt like one of those things you do. But I said, I'll do it if you want to put the agency down, because I don't think you want to continue something that's really not working. Or if you see a value, and I think there probably is, to having a more organized approach to the care. Well, a lot of patients or people that are served by one agency are served by 3 agencies. So if you see a value in having that kind of structure where the commission actually has, control's not the right word, but some substantial influence over what these 13 agencies do, then I'll show you how I think we need to do that. So anyway, we had a good relationship. I went into that job. I think I had it for 5 years or so, and then finally, at the end of my last term, he had moved on, was the president, and Rick Perry was the governor, and I could have stayed probably for a long time if I'd wanted to, but it just seemed to me when I was eligible for retirement, I'd done my deal, and it was time for me to go find something else to do.
Where did the CHIP program fit into your
so
tenure?
I was the Commissioner of Health and Human Services when CHIP was first approved. I was involved in the legislative discussions, heavily involved in those discussions about it. The governor felt strongly about getting the CHIP program up and running. It was relatively new federal money that was available to do that. And so it actually began at the same time that I was at the commission.
Do you think that helped children get more mental health services?
Yeah, no doubt that it did. More services of all sorts, including mental health services. I think it was, it was an augmentation to what was being done in Medicaid. It was for people with a little higher income levels than Medicaid. And it, I'm one who believes that you shouldn't get anything for free. Even if you don't pay much, you should pay something that makes you feel valued in providing that for your child. Yes. So CHIP was one of those. Medicaid doesn't work that way, but CHIP was. And you'd pay an affordable amount to get the health insurance that your child needed. And I think people felt good about that.
What policies do you wish had gone differently or had been different during your tenure?
Yeah. One of the things that I think we lost as a state, and this is just my bias from my experience, but when we had citizen boards that sat over the agencies of health and human services, you were accountable to those volunteer citizen boards as a commissioner. They had the purview to evaluate everything they were curious about in your agency. They had connections to advocacy groups and people that were unique to them and you wouldn't necessarily have as an agency head. And I think there was far more public accountability for the work of an agency when you had those boards. And then the decision was that those were not necessary and they became advisory in nature, and then they went away altogether in most cases. So I think that's structurally, in terms of the way government works, my sense is that we we maybe gained some efficiency. I'm not sure how much, but gained some efficiency by not having those boards and having all of it administratively constructed and answered to the legislature, and primarily the governor, but also the legislature. But when you had a board, there was a different feel about your accountability. You knew they were in it for the right reasons, and they were very helpful. Smart people that got on these boards, and spent the time to understand the mission of the agency and how it was being deployed, and what needed to happen. And anyway, that's the biggest change that I think and that was at the very end of my career. The biggest change was that, and I think not for the best reasons.
So after you left state government, what did you decide to do?
Well, I had worked many, many years in the public sector, and I had told my wife, I said, what I'm going to do is decompress. I'm going to make sure for 6 months I don't do anything else. I'm just going to think about it. I'm going to piddle around, and then I'll figure out what's next for me. And somewhere along, and I made that decision because I knew when my term was up, my term as Health and Human Service Commissioner was going to be up at the end of December of that year. So I had made it known early, everybody knew that I was going to leave, and so I had a lot of time to think about that. And so somewhere along the line, I was talking to somebody, and I said, they asked me what I was going to do, and I said, I'm just going to take it easy. I'm going to look around. I'm going to think about, and I'm going to take at least 3 months off. And I heard myself say 3 months, and I'd been saying 6 months. It was absolutely unconscious. Right. I didn't consciously change my mind. I just obviously was moving that. Anyway, long story short, I retired the 31st, and on the 3rd of January, I was opening my new office. And
oh my
so
goodness.
I took a day and a half, essentially.
Wow.
So the next thing I did was started a consulting business and lobby business. And for a long time, I spent a lot of time doing lobby work. I don't do so much of that anymore, but I still have a pretty active consulting business. And it's in all forms of healthcare. I don't do much in fact, I don't think I do anything now in the mental health field. But I have a lot of healthcare clients and insurers and others around the Medicaid space primarily that keep me pretty busy.
How do you feel about that role versus what you were doing before? Do you think it was just a natural progression, or do you see your career prior to this as being more of a mission as opposed to?
No doubt it's different. After the agency, it's different. I like what I do. I get paid well for it. I have a lot of interesting clients and interesting relationships with those clients, but it's a paycheck. I mean, and I want them to do well, and I'm compulsive enough about getting something done that I work hard for them, but I don't have the same zeal and passion for what I'm doing now that I had during those years when I was in state government. And never was it any greater, the passion any greater than it was when I was close to the action at the Terrell State Hospital, the action being the delivery of services. That was by far the most meaningful period in my career. And, you know, I may have said this earlier, but I absolutely believe that you get so much more than a paycheck when you are working in the delivery of care to other people. I mean, you go home with a paycheck and a heart that's full of, you know, pride in the work you did to help somebody out. And you know, that I saw that everywhere I looked at Terrell. It's not, I didn't make anybody better, but I saw people who did and what they got out of that. And I think that's a powerful thing that keeps people willing to work in very difficult situations. And, you know, as I look back, one of the things you asked me about policy change, this is more of a cultural, attitudinal change, but there was some, at least respect and maybe even a little bit of honor in public service back in the early 70s when I got into public service. And I think public service has been vilified by politicians and others that make people who work for the government out to be less than, lazy, not ambitious. And, having had the experience of working with a lot of private sector companies, which I have for the last 25 years or so, I can tell you those people are no smarter, no more ambitious, no more effective, no better organized than the people that I worked with when I was in state government. You have the scrutiny of every legislator and the public watching and judging everything you do in public service, where it's a different dynamic in the private sector.
Yeah.
And they have challenges that we don't have in the public sector. But I just have such admiration for the people that I worked with over the years at the Terrell State Hospital, and not only appreciation for the way they helped me, but an admiration for the way they helped people that came to us for care.
Well, is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't discussed?
Well, I'd say, in this same line of thinking, I hope we get to the place where the public recognizes just how valuable the work is of people who work in public service, and particularly in the mental health field, and what a challenge it is and how important their work is. And
Yes.
to have been a small part of that over my career is, as I look back, if somebody asks me, and they sometimes do, what was your favorite job of all that you had, I'd point to Terrell. I really would, and do.
That's good to know. Well, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.